Welcome everybody to today's session, Voices from the Grassroots, COVID-19 and Women from the Global South in honor of the International Day of Rural Women. My name is Anika Zaumi and I am the Community Engagement and Gender Equality Specialist at the Ontario Council for International Cooperation. I'm joined today by 6 incredible speakers from around the world who have been leading at the front line in their own communities, supporting Building Back Better, food security and sovereignty, and supporting Indigenous knowledge in grassroots communities in the face of COVID-19. There's several topics that we will have the honor of covering today and so many insightful experts that we will hear from. Before we get into it, I just want to cover some housekeeping rules. This is a webinar style, so participants will not have the opportunity to turn on their camera unless you raise your hand during the question and answer session, and we will invite you to speak. You also cannot unmute yourself unless you have been invited to speak. However, please feel free to use the chat or the question and answer at the bottom of your screen to share any questions or comments as you engage in today's session. Please note that live transcript has been enabled, and so you will see closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. This is to encourage accessibility and will only be available when our speakers are presenting in English. Unfortunately, at this time, we do not have closed captioning available in any other language. Interpretation is also available simultaneously in English and Spanish. In order to access this, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It looks like a little globe, and click on either the English or Spanish channel. The language you click on will be the language you will hear. So before we get into today's agenda, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Mukazee First Nation in Tiggeronto, or as it's known along settler lines as Toronto. I myself am joining from the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe on Two-Row Wampum Belt and Dish with One Spoon territory. When I think about land acknowledgements personally as a settler on this land, I think about it not just as a way to simply name the nations on whose land we live, work, and play on, but actually as a way to prompt us to frame our engagement in this space. As all of us engage in today's session, I invite you to reflect on how you benefit from the traditional territory of numerous Indigenous nations, wherever you're joining from across Turtle Island or from across the globe, and reflect on how you're being able to access spaces like this and being able to live, work, and play on unceded Indigenous territories is a privilege. And therefore, with that privilege comes the responsibility of standing in solidarity with Indigenous folks wherever we are. And so I invite you, as you take part in today's webinar, not just to think about whose land you're on, but actually how your responsibility means that you can take skills away from today's session to stand in solidarity in better and more meaningful ways with Indigenous communities wherever you are. So I hope that you will have the opportunity to use this workshop as a way to move beyond words, beyond just naming whose land you're on, to action and standing in solidarity in different ways and standing for justice with Indigenous communities close to you. So welcome everyone. I don't want to take up too much more space and time because we have so many incredible people we will hear from today. And it's been my pleasure to support an incredible group of women who have been leading the Voices from the Grassroots initiative over the last year and a half. And so I'd like to create more space for these women and speakers to share their own expertise. But before I hand off the floor to one of our group members, one of the Voices from the Grassroots members, I'll go over today's agenda. So I've just shared some welcome remarks, housekeeping, and a land acknowledgement. We will have an introduction to the Voices from the Grassroots initiative by a group member, Maria Carmona. And then we will move into remarks from our speakers, from Musa Taylor-Lewis from the Canadian Food Grains Bank, Celeste Smith from culturalseeds.com, Anastasia Thicke from the National Farmers Union, Francine Picard Mukazee from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, from Felipe Zico from Mujeres en Acción, and from Wangui Gitao from World Renew. Afterwards, we will have a moderated Q&A hosted by Kagwiria Muturia, who is also a member of the Voices from the Grassroots Initiative. And finally, we will have some space for all of you to share some reflections, and then I will wrap up and close for the afternoon. So with that, I will hand it to Maria Carmona from the Gender Equality Hub and the Voices from the Grassroots Working Group to share some background about the project.
Thanks, Anika. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm Maria, and I'm pleased to give a short background on the Voices from the Grassroots Initiative on behalf of the working group. So we started this initiative in 2020. Members of the Gender Equality Hub of the OCIC embarked on a project to document the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on vulnerable women and girls from Afghanistan, Guatemala, Honduras, Kenya, Mali, Philippines, Uganda, and South Sudan. So we dubbed this initiative Voices from the Grassroots, or VFG for short. And this project allowed like-minded members committed to global social justice, human dignity, and participation for all to collaborate and to take concrete action. The group tapped into the power of storytelling and captured the voices of women and girls through a digital flipbook, the cover page of which is now shown on your screens. And I believe Anika will share the link to the flipbook in the chat box later. The next slide shows the working group of the VFG, composed of individual members of the GE Hub and those representing the OCIC member organizations, such as Canadian Executive Service Organization, World Accord, World Renew, and the Global Women's Network. Building on the digital flipbook and as a way of continuing to amplify the voices of women and girls from the grassroots, a series of virtual events, which are summarized in the next slide, were held in commemoration of the International Human Rights Day in December of 2020 and the International Development Week in Canada last February 2021. The VFG project was also featured during a session of the NGO CSW Virtual Forum that ran parallel to the official session of the 65th United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in March 2021. Nadia Zewari, a member of the VFG working group, and I had the privilege of writing a reflection piece on the Voices from the Grassroots project. And here we analyzed and drew key themes from the stories and the 3 virtual events, distilled lessons learned from the process, and outlined potential ways forward for the VFG project and action points for governments and policymakers, civil society, communities, and individuals. And so here in this slide, Nadia and I are happy to share some of the highlights of the reflection piece. And Anika will also share a copy of that reflection paper in the chat box. So here are some of the key messages that were highlighted in our report. First is that COVID-19 deepened pre-existing inequalities and had disproportionate impacts on countries and communities, particularly on those who identify within different genders, races and ethnicities, age, education, and abilities. Second is that while women and girls suffered the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19, their resilience was also displayed as they responded to the impacts of the pandemic. And you will see this throughout the stories that were highlighted in the digital, or that were profiled in the digital flipbook. Third is that women and girls need platforms such as the voices from the grassroots so they can be heard, to call people to action and to build solidarity. And lastly, women and girls from the grassroots have spoken and we have heard, and it is now time for action. Some of the action points that we have included in the report is, first, to break patriarchal cultures and societal norms where men have the control of resources and the power to make decisions at home, in communities, companies, organizations, and in government. Next, to truly embrace equality and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we should work to decolonize aid and break down systems of structural racism. It is our collective responsibility to transform the international development sector and to shift power and resources to local actors. And last but not least, we should put gender equality at the front and center of programmatic and advocacy actions to address the impacts of COVID-19. My final slide shows how Nadia and I visualize the central role of the GE Hub and OCIC in facilitating collaboration between the Global North and Global South across sectors and countries and among different sectors and stakeholders represented by the interconnected spheres. The Voices from the Grassroots project is an example of how the GE Hub and OCIC provided a platform to enable women and girls from the grassroots in the Global South to share their stories to the Global North, to Canadian stakeholders, as well as the global community more broadly. The aim of our roundtable discussion today is to continue the conversations on issues that matter to women and girls, not only in the Global South countries, but also here in Canada and across the world. With that, and without further ado, I would like to give the floor back to Anika to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers, and we look forward to your active participation and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's always, like I said, it's always such an honor for me to hear from all of the members of the group on what a transformative and incredible experience this has been for them and all of the lessons that have been learned. The report is ready to go. We hope to share it later today, so stay tuned to your emails and social media, OCIC's social media, for us to circulate it. It is a rich report reflecting on not just the lessons learned, but also the best practices that organizations can employ in order to better support amplification from the grassroots of women and other communities who are disproportionately affected by crises. So thank you so much again to Maria Carmona and Nadia Zawari for all of your hard work and legwork in consolidating the reflections and learnings from all of our events and initiatives. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to share that we are joined today by 6 speakers, 3 of which are based in Canada and 3 of which are based scattered across the world. And we have the honor today of hearing from them what the role is of grassroots communities in the face of gender inequity, climate crises, and food insecurity and sovereignty challenges. I will introduce each of these speakers one by one and invite them to share 3 to 5 minutes of their own personal experiences and reflections on what Voices from the Grassroots mean, what food security, how it manifests, and what gender equity, how gender equity plays a key role in overcoming a lot of these challenges. So firstly, I would like to welcome Musa Taylor-Lewis to the floor. Musa Taylor-Lewis is the Direct Communication and Public Engagement at the Canadian Food Grains Bank. She combines her education and prior experience in community economic development, communications, and theology to motivate Canadians to get involved in Food Grain Bank's work of ending global hunger. Prior to joining the Food Grains Bank in 2018, Musa worked as the Director of Communications at Tear Fund Canada, following over a decade of work with Christian service and public sector organizations in British Columbia. Musa, it's an honor to have you here, and I invite you to share your thoughts now.
Yeah, Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and honor to be in this panel and to be able to contribute to this conversation today. The work of the Canadian Food Grains Bank itself is a partnership of churches and church-based agencies that are working together to end global hunger. And we do this in three ways. The first two are providing emergency food assistance to families in times of crisis, such as displacement due to violent conflict, because of drought that may be climate-induced, and natural disasters and economic disruptions, such as we have experienced due to COVID-19 containment measures. We also effect long-term responses to improve household food security. And this work focuses on supporting families' efforts to provide food for themselves, including promoting sustainable farming practices and working with communities to strengthen their ability to respond to changing climate. Now, women are more likely than men to be food insecure in every region of the world. This has been demonstrated in numerous reports and research over time. And so for long-term change in addressing hunger, empowering women and girls is crucial. Gender inequality, we recognize at the Food Grains Bank that gender inequality is a key contributing factor to food insecurity and is a barrier to achieving Food Grains Bank core mandate of ending global hunger. For example, 7 out of 10 people facing hunger produce food themselves, but not enough to meet their household food needs or for additional income. And in the lowest income countries, around 80% of women depend on agriculture for their livelihood. And research has shown that if women had the same access as men to productive resources, such as land, seeds, formal education, and or training opportunities, access to credit, and so on, they would increase yields on their farms by 20 to 30%. And what this would mean that we could reduce the number of people facing hunger in the world by 100 to 150 million people. At a time today when COVID-19 containment measures have increased the numbers of people facing hunger, the mid-range estimates is that this is about 115 million additional people facing hunger over 2019. It is critical that gender-sensitive responses continue to be at the forefront of responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Musa. I think it's so interesting to hear once again over and over the fact that, of course, women are disproportionately affected, and it is something that needs to be prioritized when we're thinking about what building back better and what local community-led initiatives need to address is this fact that women can and should be placed as leaders in their own communities because of the fact that they are disproportionately affected by food insecurity and sovereignty. So thank you, Musa, for that. I'd like to hand it next to Celeste Smith. Celeste Smith is Onwe Oneida from Six Nations. She is the founder of 2 Indigenous startups, a food justice advocate, a community activist, speaker, teacher, and social change maker. She recently graduated from the Fireweed Fellowship, the first Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship Accelerator in Canada, and is the winner of the 2020 Desjardins Cooperathon for Indigenous Social Change competition. Her mission is to help Indigenous women, gender diverse persons, and youth reclaim their traditional agricultural heritage. She is the founder of culturalseeds.com, and she spends her days with her grandson Wyatt and her family on Manitoulin Island. So Celeste, it's my pleasure to hand it over to you now.
Sagole, everyone. Niyanyat Celeste Smith. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for definitely Nyang'o for having me on this panel of amazing women. It's very exciting to be with all of you and to be in the company of people that are really making change, because that's what I'm all about as well. So I have a few projects that are working on exactly what Musu was talking about. food sovereignty and food insecurity in women, I focus on Indigenous women because I myself am an Indigenous woman in Canada. And we, just as all over the world, Indigenous people are some of the most marginalized people on earth. So, and women, you know, as well. So I have been lucky enough to grow up in a family of agriculturalists. I'm a seed keeper, and that responsibility has been handed to me. And I started to realize that many of my fellow people do not have that connection and are looking for that connection. So I started culturalseeds.com, which is it's about rematriation of seeds. So we are talking about getting seeds into the hands of women and Indigenous women in particular, and fighting GMOs, fighting seed ownership, and really getting back into saving our seeds, which is really important. Indigenous people still have our seeds. We have kept them through hundreds of years of colonization, but what we have to do is we have to share those seeds, because I don't believe in hoarding knowledge. We really need to spread it out. So culturalseeds.com does that. And we have several projects going on, one of which is we're developing something called We Will Plant Lodge, or GAG Gittigimegamik, which is a center for traditional agricultural knowledge, where we will invite women to come and learn on the land and to reclaim our practices. And in doing so, we will empower each other through the process. And and heal from colonization, because we still have to heal from the enforced patriarchy that's been never in our culture. Always the women were the holders of the seeds, the holders of the food, the holders of the land. So we need to bring that back, and in doing so, will heal us inside. So hopefully I can have a small part in that. So that's me. So Nyagoa, and I look forward to hearing some more stories.
Thank you so much, Celeste. It's an honor to hear from you as well. And I myself have been looking through culturalseeds.com and We Will Plant Lodge, and it's just so incredible to me to see and read and hear how much traditional knowledge has been fought to be retained amid so much colonization. And it just underscores so much more why it's so important to continue to reproduce and share and distribute that knowledge. So thank you, Celeste. It's my honor now to pass it over to Anastasia Thicke, who is joining us from the National Farmers Union. She is a 5th generation farmer from Garland, Manitoba, where she farms buckwheat, canola, wheat, flax, and oats with her dad and uncle. She's also a translator, Ukrainian, French, Spanish, Russian, and English, an artist and a pilot. She believes that farmers, especially smaller operations, can change the tide of the climate crisis through regenerative agriculture. Hear, hear. Farmers spend so much time outside with their hands in the earth and know the land intimately, and this knowledge can be used to restore ecological balance to the land. She plans to work with other members of her community in a cooperative manner to build a collaborative network of farmers using regenerative practices to produce the highest quality food. Anastasia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. And it's such an honor to be with all of these change makers here in this space and to be contributing to it. So I'm very, very grateful to being here. Yeah, a little bit about my story. I joined the NFU probably 3 years ago. I had been an activist in Winnipeg for climate and everything. And one of my voices was really, I really wanted to focus on the farming voice. So we were looking at constructing a Green New Deal for Manitoba. And I had really been putting an emphasis on a just transition for farmers. And then one of my friends had introduced me to the NFU, and I was just like, wow, I found my people. Wow, this is amazing. And it was so great. As a farmer, I'm an only child of 5th generation. I have been having some struggles with the different generational difference between, you know, my dad and my uncle, the way they farm. It's very industrial, it's very colonized. And I've been really not even pushing back, but rooting myself and just saying, no, I'm not going to farm this way. And it's really been tough because everyone around me in my area seems to be doing this thing that I just don't agree with, even though I don't really have an alternative quite yet. I've just been really holding my ground and saying no. And yeah, so when it comes to the NFU, it feels like, you know, they've been there, especially the women of the NFU have been there to support me and to help me, to give me counsel on how to do different practices, things different ways, how to interact with my family in a way that you know, isn't really causing a lot more conflict, but is finding a middle ground and seeing how we can move forward together. Yeah, so it's just been really great to have this support. You know, we have, and then balancing this kind of lived experience that I'm having and the difficulty, and then seeing all of these struggles that people are having around me, seeing how we as an organization can make this change is really important. Yeah, and within the NFU, it's not only, you know, about that, but we're also looking at how we can be more inclusive on an organizational level. For example, we've always had a women's caucus since the NFU has been founded 50 years ago, but expanding that space to even make it more inclusive to LGBTQ people who maybe don't fit in with the men and don't seem to fit in with the women. So really expanding that space to make it a more inclusive place for everyone. We also now have a BIPOC working group, which is a space specifically for BIPOC farmers, where they can have a space to connect with one another and just foster that connection and plant those seeds everywhere. Yeah, so it's been really great to have that support, and yeah, I'm really, really happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. It's really interesting for me to hear this concept of course, you know, generational knowledge, being a fifth generation farmer yourself, but also of resisting some of the practices that maybe people haven't changed just because we've always done it this way, right? So I'm interested to hear more when we get into your questions and responses. So thank you for sharing. Next, we have Francine Picard Mukazee, who is a senior policy advisor and lead for the Partnerships for the Economic Law and Policy Programs Agriculture team of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. She is responsible for the design and implementation of projects that support efforts by African regional parliamentary bodies and multi-stakeholder coalitions on investment in agriculture. She provides training on law and policy related to foreign investment in agriculture. Before joining IISD, Francine worked for the Pan-African Parliament, where she managed the capacity development program for members of parliament with a focus on agriculture, climate change, and gender. She holds a DEA in legal and political anthropology from La Sorbonne, a master's degree in European and international law from Université Paris Descartes, and a diploma in African studies from the Institut National des Langues et Civilisations Orientales. She is based in Lyon, France, and speaks English and French. So over to you, Francine.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm really happy to have that conversation and also seeing different women from different parts of the world. So I'm quite excited to have that conversation. So myself, I think that I will be talking about a network on gender equality, responsible investment in agriculture and food security that we as ISD, as well as the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO and Oxfam are supporting since 2019. As you may know, and I think this is a part of our conversation, inequality between women and men in access to land, productive resources, extension services, income generating activities are very multifaceted and multi-causal depending on where you stand in the world. So, but they represent a challenge for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are focusing our work on the Economic Community of West Africa states. That is actually a regional political and economic union that is composed of 15 countries that in West Africa. And this country, if I can have an estimate, the population is over 349 million people. And that countries have taken, are encouraging their member countries to enforce gender-friendly and inclusive agriculture law to increase production and value chain and to achieve Africa zero hunger by 2025. So in this block, they have a parliament that consists of 115 members that actually have took some kind of recommendation and recognize and took commitment to close the gender gap and enhance women participation in development, as they think that this is a key component for building a just society and achieve political, social, economic, and cultural and environmental security among their population. So the network is there for that. It's not to take the role of parliamentarian outside the parliament, but to ensure that they create a space where they can actually have parliamentarians, civil society, farmer organization, and different stakeholders, including ministerial, to come and see what are the gaps, because the law could be in place, but the difference between laws and actually what is happening in the ground could be really, really some kind of gaps. So they are trying to put all people all together to try to find some kind of solution. So the network itself, they see is as a game changer in the region. And they wanted to understand the trend and responses to the challenges that women are, and especially rural women are facing, and also close the gender gap. So this is, the networks want to see itself as a dynamic coalition to influence regional institution policies, but also research to transform and strengthen the legal framework of empowering women. But they want also to encourage most of the members to adopt national laws at regional and national level and policies that are related to gender, land, agriculture, and investments. And they would like also to create, to identify what are actually the main issues. So meaning that this place and the network want to provide a voice for the woman and a voice for the people to understand what are actually the challenges that they're meeting in order for the parliamentarian to act accordingly and not in blind. So they want that the solution be really targeted to what are the needs and the issue that I identified by the rural women themselves. So then I will end here for the first time, and then we can take questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Francine. It is very interesting to me to hear from your perspective of working with those policymakers and lawmakers and what creating space at the top down looks like, as we also reflect on this two-pronged approach, empowering and supporting women from grassroots communities, but also creating space at the top levels of our government to make sure that those efforts are being valued and reflected and replicated. So thank you, Francine. Next, I will be opening the floor to Felipe Zico, who is the Executive Director of Mujeres en Acción from Guatemala. She will be introducing herself, but I'd like to note that Felipe will be speaking in Spanish. So if you would like English interpretation, please make sure now to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and then click on Spanish, click on English in order to hear the English translation. So Felipe, I will hand it to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see that there's a unity, an interested core of people in order to put forward or to share some of the things. My name is Felipe Zico. I'm also one of the people who I was born in a poor family, but I also have, through the interest of, in order to get ahead, as a very young person at a very young age, I started working not only backing or supporting illiteracy that women suffer, because rural women, in the case of Guatemala, they are excluded completely from all opportunity, not only as women, but also as Native First Nations, as rural women. So it's been very, very hard, actually, the current situation. However, thankfully to the opportunity that we have found through other like-minded people, through other allies developed, I would say, this has allowed us to get ahead with the different women's organizational groups. One thing that I think is worthwhile talking about, that as women of action, that we have to give importance to, is the organization of these communities, of our communities. Because here in Guatemala, there's a saying that says, together we'll never be taken down. So we give the organization quite a bit of importance that way. And if the community is organized, it's so much easier as a method of working, as a working model with the community. This has really helped us as women of action, that where we've been able to support each other, creating allyships, presenting projects. That's made us stronger as organizations. And furthermore, we've given a lot of importance related to education. Without education, not formal education, we definitely, as we say in Guatemala, we're going to be stuck, mired. But thankfully, we've been able to get ahead. Many organizations, women-based organizations, in 2007, we had the opportunity to present 40 proposals. Of those 40 proposals that we presented, 20 were approved, which for us as an organization, as a women organization, is truly excellent. And I think as of that point, we had a sort of like an advance, and we had a significant or notable that means that allyships are necessary in organizations. We're not working alone, not in a bubble. We're not only working with the international organizations, but national organizations, groups, community groups. That's given us so much strength. Also, after the groups were organized, they've been trained. In reality, we've reached the soft credits, right? Meaning through national programs, we've accessed credits, not donations. And what that's allowed women to get ahead. We have a program that's called Microcredits, even though we're not part of it necessarily, but something that's very important with us is that the culture, based in history, we preserve the cultural history, because that's where everything that's related to the food security has people have it at the home level. We've always given the opportunity, not just by name, but by virtue of innately the people start to have their own victory garden, if you will, tomato, onion, the 10 or 20 hens, so they don't have to go to the store to buy eggs, for example. So we see varieties of produce harvest in their kitchen, in their home, because they can't count on, the rural folks can't really count on opportunity, access to land. They're always being minimized or eliminated because they're women. So the woman really doesn't have the right, because she isn't the one who picks the home where it is. Only it's if it weren't because they're getting married, because the husband's going to give her the sustenance, and that's not really a real situation. And therefore, in the case of Guatemala, this style, this way of working has really helped us. And we always have a hand, and we don't go to the supermarkets because we have the market. We have our own hens, we have our own rabbits. Milk, for example, milk, people have cows. And so it's great if you have a cow, because then you don't have to go to the supermarket just to buy milk. Because modern society, modern culture is that you're going to spend what in reality you don't have in order to go to the supermarkets. In that case, what we do is that we count, as we at the grassroots level, we see it as people, hopefully we'll have 2 cows and producing milk. That's great. We have well-nourished children, but of course the community, the people need to have the opportunity to access those resources. Now, that has really helped us have a clear focus on food security with respect to food security. When it comes to the pandemic, people went in lockdown, but they have their eggs, they have their hens. They may have been in lockdown. They have, and that has really highlighted people's survival skills. Now, of course, with today's in modern politics, the food security. Now, today I have to say that this is part of culture. This is part of our culture. Why? Because we can't depend on cash. We don't have payroll. We don't have a salary. We have no income. So our incomes, our resources, we have that at home. Corn, maize, for example, we're specialists in growing corn. Why? Because we don't eat bread, we eat tortillas. That's allowed us to survive. We say the poor person lives on surviving and creating their own strategies, because modernism, in reality, everything's planned. They study the poor person, they invest in studies, they invest in, but it's not really being invested into something like education or training or a productive project, for example. There's not that much investment in that respect. So I believe that based on our experiences, what we call food security. Now, in reality, it's exactly the challenge. That's the challenge, right? That the challenge is to continue strengthening, not creating, strengthening the skill set of the woman that by innately she could count on. We should count on training. What we can't count on are the opportunities. We don't count on opportunities because for that we created Women in Action, so that the woman would feel included. That it really should be a method of inclusion, not just socially, but how else can socioeconomical, because if people are organized, it's much easier to put forward proposals. We give a lot of importance in that respect, because that's what's given, that's what Women in Action is all about. And we manage the years of 2010, 2012, we had about 70 women's groups. It was a pretty strong movement. It was very good. Not only of those groups, when you have those groups, the management is easier. The management is easier because the politics tells you, oh, you're organized. That's what the politics is telling you. and the people aren't used to or belonging to an organization. In the rural area is that's they're not protected, not only from health, not only opportunity, not only education. It's been a very hard situation. However, if we're organized, then I think what's going to give us the strength, or strengthen us, not only us as people, but as groups, as organizations, and of course the allyships. Thank you.
Opportunity to hear more from you in the question and answer, but I want to also give some space for Wangui to also share her own responses. So gracias, Felipe. Our last contributor is Wangui Gitao, who's the program manager for conservation agriculture at World Renew Kenya. She's a development practitioner and has worked in the development sector for over 10 years. She has a great perspective on project implementation and management, and has engaged in managing different thematic programs that focus on vulnerable folks and communities. She's passionate about the climate, conserving environment, nature, and biodiversity for the sustainable agriculture and food security space in East Africa, Kenya, championing conservation agriculture and climate smart technologies that include agroforestry. So I'm very excited to hear from you, Wangui. Over to you.
So thank you so much. It's an honor to be in this space this evening. And so a good morning and a good evening to all of you. My name is Wangui and I work for World Renew. I would like to share what World Renew Kenya is doing with the rural women on this day of the International Day of the Rural Women. And so when we talk about the rural woman, we actually see a woman who has a great burden and a big responsibility on her shoulders to contribute towards food security first within her household, and also to the markets where she's able to sell her produce. But for World Renew Kenya, what we do so that we can be able to reach out to women farmers is that we employ very participatory approaches and methodologies so that we can empower the marginalized communities, we can empower the groups that we work with, and most of the groups actually are comprised of slightly over 70% of women as the beneficiaries whom we directly reach out to. And so what we do is that through these participatory approaches, we help the women take charge of their development. We help them identify the needs that are pressing. We help them be able to own the processes, and then as well be able to advocate and push the government as well as the donors and other partners to be able to support them in the areas where they feel the need is pressing. So when we talk about rural women, we actually see that to a large extent, the changing climate and COVID, for instance, right now as the pandemic has severely affected women. And beyond even food insecurity and the changing climate and the pandemic, we see our farmers, and especially the ones we work with in World Renew, struggling with many other challenges such as the dwindling arable land, the degrading arable land. And what we have realized is that we need to put all these aspects together and be able to form a consolidated way of working with them, because we have to use a very participatory way and include them in terms of decision making and identifying the issues that they need to address. So what we have done is that we have come up with specific interventions together with the communities to help them be able to address the issue of food insecurity, climate change, and right now mixing it together with the COVID pandemic. And so what we are doing as World Renew Kenya, or even World Renew in many of our countries where we have implementation that is going on and programs that are running, is that we have adopted a climate smart approach. And this climate smart approach is conservation agriculture. And conservation agriculture is a very good approach that helps towards mitigating the effects of climate change, and as well as helps restoring the soils and improving fertility. And as a result, we have seen increased production. And with increased production then, we have then gone back to the farmers that we are working with, and we have been able to train them on good grain storage facilities so that they can ensure adequate good storage, as well as ensure that they can have markets for this grain that they have been able to store. And so with this, we have seen that farmers have been able to have increased incomes, and particularly for the women whom we are targeting and who are our the bigger percentage of our beneficiaries, then they have incomes within their households, and that has enabled them to be more food secure and create resilience. Then with the women as well, we are empowering them financially and economically. And how we do this is through training them on village savings and loaning. And so we have the VSLA model that has enabled women to have access to credit, which maybe they could not even have otherwise had access to, because if they went to the banks or to the microfinance institutions, then we know that maybe they would not even have been able to access credit to help them maybe start up small businesses or attend to the needs that are pressing within the households. And so through the VSLA model, we have seen women economically empowered. While Renew is also working with the farmers and especially the women to promote food security in terms of helping them adapt or adopt like drought-tolerant crops, as well as set up vegetable gardens, like one of the facilitators was also saying, and also acquire small animals so that in case they do not manage to harvest on the very staple crops that many farmers depend on, then they can be able to diversify their crop production, diversify their income streams through these other channels, like having the drought-tolerant crops, having the vegetable gardens, which they can use to diversify nutrition within their household, and also have the chicken, then they can use the eggs and maybe use the chicken as meat, and therefore diversify their nutrition as well as income. Because we realize that with the kitchen gardens, they have too much. They cannot finish everything within their households. And so they are able to go out, sell their surplus, and therefore have some extra income. And with the chicken as well, they will use the eggs within the household for nutrition purposes. And again, they can sell the surplus to their neighbors or to other farmers and therefore make an income. And so with all these strategies, we have noted that, and we have seen that women farmers have been able to achieve food security. Women farmers, through these interventions, have been able to build resilience. And so from the grassroots, we see that this very small, sometimes they look very small, but they mean a lot to a woman farmer who doesn't have any other source of income other than what is within her household or within her farm. And so from these interventions as well, we have seen that with access to income through VSLA, the farmers' income and livelihoods have been secured at the household levels. Then again, the interesting bit that we have seen with our women farmers is the fact that we use them as trainers. They're the ones who train the communities either on conservation agriculture or on ensuring that they have either the kitchen gardens. And so this has increased their confidence because it has provided for them a platform where these women have been able to take up leadership positions within the communities where they live, and now they are able to participate and even engage in decision making. So we raise them up, and we know that we live in a very patriarchal society, and especially within the rural areas. So when we see a woman who has been empowered and able to take leadership positions, including decision making, then that for us is a plus. Then obviously, last but not least, we can see the joy that emanates from these women once they are empowered. And so as World Renew, we are happy that we can be able to make an impact and a change in bringing resilience, building resilience among the rural women that we engage with as they do the agricultural production. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wangui. I love this multifaceted approach to food security and sovereignty of training and equipping women and advocating for them. So it's really interesting to hear so many different approaches to achieve this ultimate outcome of food security and sovereignty. It is my pleasure now actually to hand the floor to Kagwiria Muturia, who is a member of the working group Voices from the Grassroots from the Gender Equality Hub of OCIC, as well as a gender specialist at World Renew. Kagwiria will be hosting a small moderated question and answer session where she will be posing lots of very rich questions to our panelists to further explore some of the themes that they have already raised. So Kagwiria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anika, and very many thanks to our panelists and participants. It's a privilege to join you this morning or evening, wherever you're joining us from. I have learned a lot this morning, and just hearing from the different parts of the globe makes the experience even richer for us. Seeing some of the similarities, but also some of the differences in terms of how the rural woman continues to make impact, but still continue to struggle. So I'm gonna pose a few questions to our panelists related to really the theme of the day, the rural woman and her challenges and resilience. The day was set aside by the UN really to help us put a spotlight on the critical role that the rural woman continues to play in providing food, in food sovereignty across the globe. While she has that invaluable contribution, she continues to struggle and face different challenges, either social, cultural challenges and barriers, economic barriers, but also policy level barriers where policies and ways that they can either access credit or not don't favor lots of these rural women. We also acknowledge that even as much as rural women have this critical role, it's shocking to know that only 15%, for example, of women globally own land. And it's the land that's supposed to produce land. So if you don't have land, you don't have access to collateral, you don't have collateral that you can use to borrow a loan from the bank. The other aspect that I found really interesting is how the rural woman contributes very, very little to climate change, very little. She reuses most of the things from the farm, uses organic manure and all these things, yet the impacts of climate change impacts the rural woman the most. So even as we have this conversation in the context of climate change, in the context of COVID-19, we would really want to hear from our expert panelists some of the ways that impact women and some of the ways that we can change things. And I'm gonna pose the first question to Musu. So Musu, COVID-19 really has spotlighted the reality that disasters, pandemics like COVID and other natural disasters exacerbate inequalities and push vulnerable and marginalized groups further into poverty. While women and girls were the most vulnerable in the face of pandemic, how do you feel they displayed their resilience?
Thank you so much. I want to start off by just talking a little bit about that word that we use resilience in different ways. And so we answer that in different ways. The first one way that we talk about resilience is withstanding great difficulty and suffering. And that's, in my opinion, a sort of a negative connotation of resilience, where you have to just undergo suffering. And I think one of the ways in which rural women have displayed resilience in that way is by taking on more workload, where many of them were already overburdened, right? So women are in the forefront of family care, and the workload burden increased with something like children, for example, being out of school due to containment measures of COVID-19. And the workload burden increased further when family members became sick. And as we know, disproportionate amount of women are involved in food preparation around the world, and especially in rural areas. So part of that showing the resilience is employing coping mechanisms in the face of increased food insecurity, such as eating fewer meals, using less expensive and less nutritious food options, and at the extreme, selling assets in order to ensure that their families have food to eat. And this is the kind of resilience that we're trying to mitigate to reduce the need for this kind of resilience. On the other hand, there's also, on the positive side, there's also the overcoming of difficulty and the building protection against threats that women display. And so women have shown resilience in these ways by participating and accessing training opportunities and innovating to improve their household food security. I think you've heard already quite a bit from Wangui on participation, for example, in conservation agriculture training. And we can offer these opportunities, but women are accessing them and making use of them and incorporating them into their practices. And therefore seeing the results from them. So we cannot forget that that's the case. So for example, an example I'd like to give is between August 2020 and March of this year, the Canadian Food Grains Bank members had funding from Global Affairs Canada and were able to support farmers that were affected by COVID-19 in 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa to secure some of the gains they had made from participating in conservation agriculture program. There were 55,000 farmers in total who participated in this. 27,000 of them were women. And from women-led households, women farmers accessed that training and made use of it. And after 8 months of programming, 18,000 female-headed households had an acceptable food consumption score. It's one of the ways we look at whether or not people are achieving food security. And 63% of the farmers who participated in that program reported improved access to food in their households. And in some of the ways that Felipe is talking about, because they've grown more food, they're not going out, they're not spending the income, but they're also able to sell excess to obtain income to purchase other food items that they may not grow in order to have that more balance and better nutrition. We also found that additional support for savings groups and provision of inputs to female farmers who had no income due to COVID-19 were able to use that income to buy quality seeds, poultry, goats, and sheep, and to engage in small-scale businesses in order to overcome the difficulties that they face as a result of COVID-19. So that's the sort of the positive way that women have displayed resilience. Gender-sensitive extension messaging and aggregation centers also enabled women to produce and sell more and at a better price. So again, not only are they hearing, not only they're accessing the training and information available to them, but they're putting it into practice to better, to improve the outcomes for their families. So as of March 2021, we saw 17,000 female farmers were members of savings groups from this add-on program, and 14,000, that's 84% of those women, had accessed credit from those groups. So they are displaying resilience by actually making use of the opportunities that are available to them. And so we are building on those learnings from this experience in another collaboration with the Government of Canada by combining humanitarian assistance and early recovery programming with a focus on women who where we're already seeing very encouraging initial results. And I just want to emphasize that this need to collaborate across different levels, I think we've talked about, Francine talked about influencing policy, we are keen to make sure that these results are being put in front of governments, that we are advocating for more investments in rural women, in agriculture, particularly in women, because we know that those policies will be taken advantage of by those women in ways that improve their household security and in ways that allow them to build protection against threats. And that's the third way we use the word resilience. And in order to build protection against threats, we need to have the cooperation of society, of governments, in order to put more social protection measures in place in order that women do not have to display resilience in that negative way, which is to continually having to withstand and continually having to overcome difficulty and suffering that is unnecessary.
Thank you very much, Musa. It's interesting that you've helped us understand resilience in a different light if we didn't before, in that it's not about having women withstand the difficult times, but how do we change that to make sure that they're actually thriving in the face of difficulties. Yeah, so thank you very much for that. I'm gonna pose the second question, really, and this is really about multiple and diverse stakeholders that are working towards the achievement of sustainable development goals and how we tend to work in silos. So policy people work on their own, the farmers work on their own, the gender equality organizations work on their own. But also I know, I'm certain some of us also have ways to ensure that some of these organizations and different actors work together. So what are some of the examples, multi-stakeholders partnerships in your work? What are some of the examples of multi-stakeholder partnerships in your work that you think can be referenced in achieving of the sustainable development goals? So I'll invite Francine or Celestine, whoever has would like to respond to that question.
Francine, no? Yeah? You'd like
Yes,
to go
you
ahead?
can. But go ahead. I will.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sustainable development goals. Definitely the two main projects I'm working on definitely attribute to almost all of the goals. Specifically, you know, gender women, right? So we're focused on women. We're focused on, we use the word rematriation instead of repatriation because we, like I said, we're focused on women. So We Will Plant Lodge specifically is focused on women and getting women onto the land to relearn, because we had that traditional ecological knowledge. So we're not creating it, right? We are relearning it, right? So that's what our project is doing. It's land-based, and the women are on the land for a certain amount of time, and we're teaching traditional agricultural techniques, and also we're teaching modern agricultural techniques so that they can have a foot in both worlds. And so that will, not only will it increase, again, we were talking about resiliency, but it will increase the resiliency in communities, right? Because again, just like Felipe was talking about, the women are going to bring back that knowledge back to their communities and become leaders in their communities and connect with each other, and then talking about empowerment as well, right? So those things are going to happen. And yeah, so basically empowerment through agriculture, because in Canada, less than 10% of farmers are women. So, and in our culture, in Haudenosaunee culture, all the agriculturalists are always women. So we have a lot of work to do to bring that back. But once we get moving, and once we connect to other programs that are starting, you know, youth women, girls are really interested in this, especially because of COVID happening and food security. Now people are really talking about it. and really realizing how important it is, because people don't know where their food comes from, right? It's just so easy to just go to the store and pick up your food, and when all of a sudden you can't do that, then you start to think, wow, okay, this is really, food security is something that actually affects me and not just, you know, someone else. So yeah, so that's how our project is looking at it. So
thank you, Celeste. Francine, do you, what are your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, so for myself, I think that working together is actually a key success. We cannot continue working in silos, because we could have all the best laws, all the perfect framework, but as long as even the stakeholders do not understand them, do not participate to elaborate them, the success cannot be there. So I think that's why we are actually creating that, the work that we're doing with parliamentarians in ECOWAS. The idea beyond the network is like the law are in place, the law are rights, but those frameworks are not put in place into action. They are not there in the ground, and it's really, really important that the different stakeholders are there and also contribute to them towards that. So I think continuing to engage with different stakeholders is really key. To continue the conversation, to continue to try to find all the solutions all together is really, really key. And I think that's why with the COVID situation that happened, ISD, FAO, and Oxfam has put together webinars, actually, because we could not meet anymore. So we bring together parliamentarians from different parts of the world to ensure that we bring the conversation when they are deciding around laws or policies. They need to take into account gender, because the solutions are not the same. We need to take into account the specificity of women. And we were quite surprised that the first meeting we bring around 200 parliamentarians, because they were like lost in asking themselves, like, we need to hear what people are thinking. We need to know exactly what is happening in the ground. And some of the solutions are also made by women. We need to hear them, and we need also to take that into consideration and see if some of the solutions that they have there and that are working, we can duplicate them to our own context. So I think it's really important to keep that kind of platform where we can learn from each other and when we can advance. And I think also listening to those in needs, or because sometimes they have already the solution. And that is really, really important to have that kind of platform quite open.
Thank you, Francine. Interesting, you raised the point of how there's no policy without the people. The parliamentarians cannot sit and have policy, or bigger NGOs cannot sit and make decisions without really consulting with the different actors and making sure we're working with everybody. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna pose the third question to three of our panelists, and I'll ask you to be a bit brief in your response. It's sad that we are aiming at ending at 11:30 Eastern time with these rich conversations, but also we appreciate that people might have other things to do, but it's an ongoing conversation that's just beginning today. So in the context of COVID-19, in the context of climate change, in the context of a lot of gender inequalities and food insecurities, and all these challenges that we are experiencing right now, these things call for really innovative approaches to tackle and address them. So maybe we can hear from Wangui, Felipe, and Anastasia, what are some of the innovative approaches or projects you have within your organizations to undertake to help women and girls cope with these challenges? So in any order, whoever is ready to go first and share some of the innovations that you have.
I think I can begin, and I'll just share briefly about an approach that we used. I had mentioned about VSLA programming, where we have been engaging our women in terms of empowering them financially. And so what we did, especially during the pandemic, is that we noted the women were no longer meeting and were not able to save their money, neither were they able to borrow credit whenever they needed it. And this was also coupled with the fact that there were too many demands within the household, and especially in relation to attending to the many family members who came to the rural areas once COVID started. So what we did as World Renew is that we started encouraging our women farmers to go virtual, because the world had actually moved virtual, And so how they went virtual is by use of a mobile money transfer technology, which here in Kenya, we call it M-Pesa. And so we got a few groups to begin, and we put them together, and we talked with the leaders, and the groups agreed that they can have like about three or four of their leaders come together in one place while observing the COVID guidelines. And then the other members at a set specific time, they would send in their savings through the mobile money transfer, and then they would be able to save. Then other members who needed to borrow loans or access credit then would send in their request after the savings were done. And we noted that this worked, that even like after 2-3 months of not being able to save, the farmers now were able to use this technology, and they were able to continue with their VSLE. We noted obviously the savings went a little bit lower because of the pressing demands in the household, but at least we were happy to see that our farmers could actually use an interesting tool, the mobile money transfer, to continue with their transactions and access credit and be able to save money instead of using it within their households for the pressing needs that would be there. Just some interesting innovations that helped even during the time of COVID. Thank you.
Thanks, Wangoi. Philippa, I wonder if you have some thoughts you'd like to add? Felipe, I think you're muted.
En el caso de Mujeres en Acción,
Yes, for Women in Action, when the pandemic started and hit the country quite harshly, definitely the negative part was that agricultures lost their produce because markets were closed. However, people were still continuing to reactivate their production. That's their job. That's their livelihood. That's their survival mechanism, the production. So for Women in Action, what we did was to support this reactivation in agriculture. We did that with economic resources. And one of the things we also did was prevention. We wanted to prevent people to stop working. What we wanted them is to make sure that they were using preventative methods. So what we were trying to do is strengthening communities. How did we do this? Well, we were using WhatsApp, and we were always keeping in touch. We were having one-on-one conversations with different people. And this was one of the ways in which we were able to have a relationship as a group with the community. We are now aware that we're going to continue using these tools, online tools and WhatsApp, because communication was key. We had training on prevention. We were sending information on WhatsApp, and people who had access to WhatsApp were good on that side, but people who did not have WhatsApp, what we did was to go directly to their households. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippa, for that. And seeing the thread of innovation is a lot towards use of technology. As we continue the conversation, maybe we'll get to hear about also the limitations that rural women have in the digital space in terms of access to internet and access to even literacy levels that don't allow them to use some of these spaces. And I would encourage us to continue using the chat to share your thoughts and responses. I'm seeing some very good comments in there that we might have a chance to go through as we continue. So please share your thoughts and questions in the chat as we go. Yeah, so, and if, I'm gonna go to the next question in the interest of time to make sure each of our panelists has a chance to respond to a question. And this is to you, Anastasia. Human health goes hand in hand with health of the planet. Health of the planet right now is one of the big topics that we have to talk about in the context of anything, climate change and what that means for all of us. So what is the most important lesson we should learn from the COVID-19 global health crisis to help us tackle the climate crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say definitely the interconnectedness and the ways we work in communities on a local level. COVID has really highlighted how the interconnectedness that we live in and how fragile the system is. So when it comes to farming, for example, we really need local processing. You know, the globalized food system and our reliance on it is really has been highlighted during this crisis. So we need to develop and strengthen our local food systems so that we aren't so reliant on this globalization. And in doing that, we address the climate crisis directly, because it is the transport and the exportation and the extraction that is going across the world from one place to another, and then processing food in one place and then bringing it back. That is an enormous drain on energy. It uses enormous amount of fossil fuels, and it really takes the power away from people, especially women on a local level. So yeah, and it's really, this pandemic has also really highlighted fear, and this fear causes division. So when people are, when they're afraid, they're always looking for an enemy. But if we can strengthen our bonds as a community, that this polarization is harder to take root. And by having a local food system, this makes our community stronger, not only on an economic level, but on a social level.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. If you have more thoughts around climate change and the topic of the day today, please feel free to add your thoughts in the chat. The next question is, as we get towards the end of our questions, the next question is about today as the International Day of the Rural Women. Why do you think it is important for each of us present today to amplify the voices of the grassroots or the voices of the rural women? Why is the voice of the rural woman critical in this conversation and beyond? And I'll ask Francine, Felipe, Anastasia, and Musa to answer this very briefly. In any order. And participants on the call, as well as panelists, feel free to also add your thoughts in the chat. I'm sure we will collect them and add them in the report from the call.
Okay. So I will be quite short. For me, I think we are gathering here just to remind how rural women are playing a key role in our food system. But for me, I find not only it's a question of celebrating to ensure their role, and also to be in connection of their challenges, but most importantly, it's about, we need to be more intentional in empowering women. We need to know exactly how we need to change things. Solution exists, and I think we need to work them to make them more concrete and more impactful. And I think for ourselves, with the role of parliamentarians it's on the legal framework and policies that we are working, trying to ensure that there is progress, but that progress needs also to reflect on the day-to-day. Because the law could be nice, it could be there, but as long as people do not that kind of shape or that understanding, nothing will be changing in the ground. And I think that it's a collective effort to ensure that if we want to achieve all the SDGs and to have a society that is fairer, we need to equal and more more with intention to change things and to transform things.
Thank you, Francine. Yeah, let's hear from Felipe.
Por esta oportunidad, yo creo que
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I think that the International Day of Rural Women is a tool. There are some times when, as people, as an organization, you may feel alone. But when you see a group and you see that it's a well-organized and a big group, you feel motivated. So I think that people that have been able to develop an awareness of what is happening, it is important for us to be motivated. It is important for us to carry out this type of activity. Why? Because we do not want to feel alone and unprotected. I think it's moral support, spiritual support, and motivational. I believe that this is a very good tool. And I really hope that we can continue sharing our experiences, our challenges. This is all positive. And of course, for us, and not only for us as the representatives of rural women, but for other people who have different opportunities and people who have access to the decision-making processes, to parliamentarians, and people who have the chance of maybe investing and financing projects. It is important for them to see our contribution. For us, we don't necessarily want donations, but we want the support. Women have developed our capacities and our skill sets by nature. What we need is to have support for us to have startups, to be entrepreneurs. And I think that that's what women want. Women, again, by nature, is basically born with a job. For us, for example, in Guatemala, children by the age of 7, they know already how to weave and how to create art. And I think that gives them a responsibility from a young age because they learn how to survive. So I think that this should be an extended invitation for everyone, more for the people who know the realities of women and for those who have important roles and important positions. It is important for us to have them as allies. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe. Musa, I wonder if you have some thoughts on the question.
Yes, I'll just be very brief and just speak from the perspective of somebody who's responsible for communications and public education on these issues here in Canada. We have at Food Grains Bank signed commitments to increase communications from the perspective and in the voices of people we serve who are facing hunger themselves, including rural women. And the reason is that we recognize that being part of the humanitarian and international development sector comes with a great responsibility. We are shaping, we have a significant role in shaping the perceptions of Canadians about the rest of the world, and therefore the responses that result from those perceptions and understanding. And misconceptions have consequences. We are telling stories that are not our own, and each of us speaks from our own experience and felt needs. If we do not hear the voices of the rural women or from the grassroots, we will never be able to appropriately support sustainable responses. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Musa. That's very powerful. Let the women speak in their own voice. Let them speak to what they need. And to what Felipe has said, we don't want donations, we want partnerships, you know? So, and on to our last question of the day. I honestly wish we can do this longer, but Yeah, so, and I'll invite all the panelists to maybe quickly, really quickly, in maybe 30 seconds or 40 seconds, to tell us now more than ever, it is critical to listen to the voices of the communities from the grassroots. Really what we're just saying. What are some of the recommendations or call to action do you have for the world leaders? If you head global affairs in the House or USAID or the different governments of the countries that you come from, what is the one call to action that you would say related to hearing from the grassroots and supporting the marginalized groups? So in any order, quickly as we sum up.
So I'll start this time. My first one will be enabling voices. I think we need to ensure that women are given the opportunity to meaningfully participate in processes and decisions that affect them. So we cannot build without them. And my other recommendation that will be saying increase income. We cannot achieve any kind of solution if women do not have enough income. So I will yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We can go next real quick. Listen to Indigenous people. We have the answers that the earth needs right now.
True. Thank you.
– Invest in women involved in agriculture. It's been shown to alleviate food insecurity exponentially compared to other kinds of interventions. So invest in interventions that involve women in agriculture.
I think for me, it would be more of asking the leaders and the government to support in terms of access to infrastructure as well as markets, so that women can be able to participate in that system, in that place in the value chain.
So no pressure. If you've not had a chance to add your final thoughts, you can add it in the chat. We have some very, very good feedback in the chat in there. And as I hand back to Anika, I'll just pick some of them to quickly highlight. Celeste says, in our culture, we wear flowers on our shoes to remind us that we must walk softly on the earth. We believe that the next 7 generations will be born from the soil of the earth. So if we think this way and think of the next generation to come, the sacrifices we need to make in order to adapt to climate change will be easier. Modern agricultural technologies and commodity-driven economies are destroying the planet. Indigenous people have a sustainable model that we can look at. Very, very powerful. One other comment that I saw from Ian Robson is food sovereignty is the right of the nation or the people to set their own goals and rules for their food needs based on local environmental and social conditions. Huge multilateral companies are taking over food systems and making it harder to raise and provide local farmers for local needs. Food security is much more than enough food. Knowledge of raising and processing and storing local food is a skill of the local people. Building on the local knowledge is a key to better, less violent, more united world. Sharing and understanding is needed to replace the larger reliance on multinational companies trading food from one place to another on less than fair terms. And on and on. That's a really, really, really powerful comment as we talk about the role of the rural women and the link to environmental sustainability. And that's really related to what Celeste, you've said. How do we take care of the earth? How do we conserve local knowledge? So back to you, Anika, and thank you very much. I honestly wish we had more time for this, but also to say this is the first conversation on the topic by the GE Hub, and you will be hearing from us with more related topics in the near future. Thank you. Back to you, Anika.
Thank you so much, Kogweria, for holding the space, and to all of our speakers. I know we're running over time, but as Kogweria shared, there's so much richness and expertise here, and I wish we could hold this space more fully here as well, but this is just the start of a discussion, and so I hope that we will all collectively have the opportunity to continue to speak to this and continue to engage on these topics. Before I wrap up, I'd like to launch a quick poll. It's only a couple of questions. All attendees should be able to see it. This is just for our internal reporting to get an understanding of how effective the session was and how we can improve our offerings in the future. This is completely anonymous and will not be shared. So I invite you, as we close for the afternoon, morning, whatever it is where you are, please do take a look at that short poll and fill it out. Just a note, panelists, you won't be able to do this as you won't see the pop-up on your screen. So with that, I want to share a big thank you to all of you that attended, to all of you that held this space. Specifically, I want to thank our panelists, Anastasia Thicke, Celeste Smith, Felipe Zico, Francine Picard, Musa Taylor Lewis, and Wangui Gitao for your time to bear witness to the space, to hear from all of you in your own unique experiences, but also to learn and hear from all of the commonalities and similarities across all these different contexts. So thank you to all of you. Thank you as well to our two interpreters today, Andres Baker and Araceli Durango, for facilitating this event in a way that we can hear from folks in their own language, in that authentic engagement that we hope to encourage. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone here for making the space, for taking part. Please don't forget to take a look at the chat and some of the incredible resources that have been shared there. As Maria shared at the beginning of today's session, there is a report that consolidates all of the reflections and best practices that the Voices from the Grassroots group have collected over the past year and a half of their work. And this report will be shared later today. So please keep an eye on OCIC's social media, as well as your emails, because you will receive a link to view and share that report yourselves. But with that, thank you everyone for being here, for sticking around the extra couple of minutes, and we look forward to seeing you engaged further. Thank you all and have a great day.